Alright, Sewcialiters, I am back and I am doing block number 16, the friendship block. And so for this, I'm doing the 9-inch block and I've got my prints and my background. And so for my background, I need 1 4-inch square, 3 3.5-inch squares, and 16 2-inch squares. And then for my print, which is a nice dark blue with some spots on it, I'm going to need 1 4-inch square and 8 2 by 3.5 rectangles. So the first thing we're going to be working on is our flying geese. So we can take all of our rectangles of our prints, and there should be 8 of them, and lay them out. And we're going to be taking our 2-inch squares of our background. I've already drawn lines right here across them. And we are going to start by putting them into the corner of our blocks. So we want to make sure that our line is facing in, so it's going to look like this and have a nice triangle in the middle with your print as the center of that triangle. So we're going to put this here on this side for all of our blocks, corner to corner. And I'm trying to just make sure that I'm getting some of my nice little blue flower prints on my background to show on my block. So that's why I'm kind of rearranging them a little bit, just to see like which side I like best, or if there's anything on that side for a print, and trying to angle it so that it will be showing in my block. Okay, so I basically have these all nice and lined up. And I am going to be sewing directly on this line. Once you're done sewing on this line, you're going to cut with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this side and then fold it out, and I would iron it towards your dark side of your block. That way hopefully it doesn't show through your background fabric if it is a light color. So now that I have these all laid out, I'm going to sew on the line, cut, press, and get back to you guys. Alright, so I am back and I have sewn all of my rectangles on. I've cut them and had a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I pressed towards the dark side of the fabric on all of these. And now that I have those done, then I can take the remainder of my 8 2-inch squares and put them on the other side of these to make our flying geese complete. So I'm going to do that now. Probably put that one there since it doesn't have a lot of pattern on it. Working through these, making sure that your line is now going towards your other background fabric, just to make sure you get a nice point on these. Alright, so now that I have those pretty much all lined up, I am going to sew directly on the line, cut with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then press it possibly open just so that this point isn't going to be too bulky for when I'm sewing all my other stuff. And I'll get back to you when I have done that. Alright, so I have gotten my flying geese done, and now I've paired them up like how we're going to be sewing them. So we're going to be sewing across the top of this flying geese to the bottom of the next flying geese, and we're going to do this for all 4 sets of our flying geese. I think that's basically it. Sorry, my machine was trying to eat the corners of my flying geese, so I would suggest once you're putting them on, that you start from this tip instead of a corner tip, because sometimes it will try to eat your corners, and if it destroys those corners, then you have to cut out new pieces, I think. Or you could try and make it work, but for me, I would have to cut them out again. So 1/4 inch seam allowance up on the top here and here, fold them down, and then we're going to sew right across here for all of these sets, and I'll come back to you when I'm done. Alright, so I have finished my flying geese, and I have pressed them up towards that top dark geese, technically. So I've got all those pairs done, and now we are going to be moving on to our half triangle squares. So you're going to take your 4-inch square of your background and your 4-inch square of your print, you're going to take your background, have a line drawn diagonally across it, and you're going to match it up to your 4-inch print. And you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides of that line. And then we're going to cut on that line, and then we'll have 2 3.5 inch rectangles, not rectangles, sorry. There are 2 3.5 inch squares when we are done with this. So I'll get back to you when I have my 2 3.5 inch squares. Alright, so I have done my 4-inch squares. So what I did was I sewed them on both sides, and then I cut in half to get these two, and it was folded like this when I cut it in half from that line. And then I pressed towards the dark side right here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I trimmed them down to 3.5 inches total for both of these squares. So now that we have these two squares, we have our flying geese, and we have our regular background 3.5 inch squares, we can now start putting this block together and laying it out. So the first thing we're going to do, just to make it easy, is we're going to take our background squares and put them diagonally from each other, like this. Make a nice diagonal chess looking setup right here. Okay, and then we are going to take our trimmed 3.5 inch rectangles, and we are going to put them next. So I know that I need to have this large print square connected to our middle background square. So I'm going to pop this one here, and the same will happen on the other side, where I'm taking this dark print and making sure that the triangle is meeting the tip of my middle square. And now we can fill in with our flying geese. So it's going to be going pointing this way and pointing that way. So flying geese pointing that way, flying geese pointing that way, flying geese pointing this way, and flying geese pointing that way. And you'll see it once I have it laid out. I know it's kind of hard seeing with my hands in there. So here's the first block, making sure it's pointing to our large print triangle. And then this one is also pointing towards that. So you can see the points going that way. And now we want to make sure that these flying geese are pointing towards this triangle. So I'm going to push this down here, and this one over here. So this is the basic layout of our friendship block. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew these three together, and then this row together. And I will probably be putting my seams out just so that I get some nice crisp seams on here, which I know isn't really traditional because this is a darker one. I don't think I'll have an issue with it showing up. But these will be pointing away from the flying geese so that it doesn't cause too much clutter when I'm trying to quilt this. And then these seams will be pointing inward towards my middle blocks. That way I can get nice points on these once I sew those rows together. So I'll come back to you when I have these 3 rows sewn together. Alright, so I am back, and I have sewn all 3 of my strips together. So for the 1/4 inch seam allowance with the pressing, I've pressed inwards in the middle and outwards on both of these ends. So that way when I fold them down and sew them, they will make nice little tips here and here. And then I can sew with the 1/4 inch seam allowance across, and the block will be done. So I will get back to you once I have laid these down, sewn across. Probably will be pressing these seams open here and here, just so it lies a little flatter, but I'll let you know once I am done with that, and I'll get back to you. Alright, so this is the final picture of my put together block number 16, friendship block for the Sewcialites. So I, of course, for my last seams, I ironed them open so that they'll lay a little flat, because some of these areas are going to get pretty thick for quilting. But other than that, I think the block turned out pretty nice, and I hope this tutorial helped you guys. Have a good night.